Welcome to the California Sun podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Schechtman. At a moment when the very nature of knowledge and truth seems to hang in the balance, when libraries are under both digital and cultural siege, and the preservation of our collective memory feels more fragile than ever, my guest, Brewster Kahle, stands as both sentinel and revolutionary. Kahle's journey began at MIT, where as a 19-year-old computer science student, he was asked a deceptively simple question: what can you do with your life that's worthwhile? His answer would eventually reshape our understanding of digital preservation. After graduating in 1982, he helped launch thinking machines, designing supercomputer chips that could search everything. This led to the development of the Wide Area Information Server, the first system enabling database searches through the Internet. He later sold his company to AOL and in 1996 co-founded Alexa Internet, which Amazon would later acquire. Through it all, he never lost sight of a singular vision: to build what many have called the modern Library of Alexandria. Today, from within a transformed Christian Science church in San Francisco, its Greek columns echoing the ancient Library of Alexandria, Kahle orchestrates what may be humanity's most ambitious attempt at preserving our collective digital consciousness. The Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, his life's work, has evolved into vastly more than just a repository of old web pages. It stands as a bulwark against digital amnesia, housing everything from forgotten broadcasts to endangered books, from lost websites to cultural artifacts that might otherwise vanish into the digital ether. But now, as cyber attackers breach its virtual walls and traditional publishers challenge its very foundation, Kahle and his mission face an existential moment. The question is not just about the survival of one digital library, but about the future of human knowledge itself in our rapidly evolving digital age. It is my pleasure to welcome Brewster Kahle here to the California Sun podcast. Brewster, thanks so much for joining us.
Jeff, thank you very much for that kind introduction.
Well, it is a delight to have you here. I want to go back in our little Wayback Machine here and talk a little bit about how this all got started. Talk about your original vision and how it initially evolved.
Oh, it's actually quite simple. I mean, we're really what we want is a library that works in the digital era. We want a library that hopefully is better than what we had during the paper era. But as you outlined, there have been enormous challenges towards trying to realize that vision. We've been promised the Library of Congress on our desktop for decades and decades. The dream of the universal library has been alive in human consciousness for thousands of years. Can we go and make it so that we can stand on the shoulders of giants? Can we learn from the past? Can we build things and make things and write things and create things that are worthy of being in the library that will then be preserved for the next hundreds and thousands of years? None of this is new. It's all just being challenged now by a new set of players.
What has been the greatest obstacle? Has it been money? Has it been technology, storage capability, the ability to gather the information? Where have the obstacles been along the way?
Well, let's just take the goal of trying to basically make a library as nice or as good as what I grew up with, where in White Plains, New York, you can just walk in and there's just this aisles and aisles of books, and there's a librarian standing there saying, we have everything, and if we don't have it here, we'll get it for you through interlibrary loan. That was the promise of libraries. That was the offer. That was what Andrew Carnegie in the United States made come true. A system of being able to depend on the history of knowledge being able to be gotten to. It was just slow. With the advent of computers, we knew this back in 1980. I mean, this is before the Macintosh. This is before the internet really became widely available. We knew it was coming, that basically people were going to be creating works in digital form, distributing works in digital form, that there was going to be this possibility of a flowering of interconnected with people, that we're going to have computers helping us find the right things, so anybody can be a publisher and find their natural audience without having to go through the chokeholds that were in place during the paper era because of some of the cost constraints of the paper era. So all of this was going to be possible. And in fact, it would have been promised by Vannevar Bush, by Ted Nelson, later by Tim Berners-Lee of the World Wide Web. This was the vision of the internet. And it could have all been finished, like done by the year 2000. That was when I calculated back then, we'd have the technologies and we'd have all the money is not much to go and digitize these materials. The storage is not much. So why hasn't it happened? And it's basically, I would suggest, it's based on those that want to control access to information have done an outstanding job of this. And that's really, in this country, it's the big publishers that they have gotten to a point that they can go and control who gets to see what and what information is produced. Yes, the internet, you turn to Google or whatever, and it seems infinite. But if you know about something specific, something deeply, what's on the net isn't all what's there, that it's shallow. There's something on every Wikipedia page. Great, we love Wikipedia, but it's shallow. So you need to be able to go deeper. And a lot of that deeper material is not available on the net. And we have now pretty much everybody under the age of 40 has grown up what they've seen on screens. They don't really use the library in the same way that I did growing up. They use what's on screens. And we know that people will learn from whatever it is they can get a hold of, and what is on screens is not the best we have to offer. So what we have is we're growing up with people that are growing up without the best we have to offer, and we're seeing the consequences.
How much does copyright law and the reality of copyright play a role in this?
Copyright law is one of the methods of control, but now the big publishers have actually moved beyond copyright. They've made it last forever and make everything a copyright infringement, but then they want now to go and license everything. So it's on top of copyright. They make it so you can't actually buy anything. So you can't buy an ebook. No, there aren't libraries that own any ebooks from the major publishers. Zero, none. So they can't digitally own or preserve these materials. They can't lend them. They can't go and do interlibrary loan anymore. And none of this will go into the public domain ever. So we have a chokehold. Not only was the actions around copyright so effective in the late 20th century to basically make a Carnegie Library impossible in the digital era, they've now gone on to do the licensing. So, you think about your books or your music or the movies that you see, and do you actually own any of that? No, I mean the era of DVDs or whatever. No, the physical era. But now as we moved into digital, we don't own it, and the constraints are crippling. We're not allowed to improve or repair our digital devices. This is the right to repair has been calling out the problems of the lack of digital ownership. So it would be easy if we just had companies being capitalist in the sense that they would make products and sell them like they used to. But it's moved into a very different era.
To what extent is AI changing this for either better or worse in terms of the AI training on so much of this information and really raising copyright issues that were dormant for a while all over again?
Well, I think of the AI technologies that we're seeing around that trying to answer your questions as just another generation of the search engines that were born in the 1990s. So in the 1990s, we let the robots read in this country by going and crawling worldwide websites to go and produce these services to help people find information more effectively. There was a trade-off between crawling and then directing things back to where they came from so that there would be credit or money or advertising or whatever it is that the original websites wanted. So that worked in the United States. Interestingly, Europe and Japan, for instance, said, no, we're going to go with what the publishers want and not allow the any search engines to crawl worldwide websites without permission, effectively making search engines impossible in Japan and Europe. And in those countries, they still don't have a search engine. So they sided with the publishers. Then in this era of the next generation, the publishers are feeling very strong and they're suing these new generation search engines over and over and over again. And they're making it so that these search engines, the AI companies, are hiding where the information's coming from because that will lead to more lawsuits, which is, I think, absolutely the wrong way about it. That there are trade-offs. But interestingly, Europe and Japan are saying they're not going to sit out this next .com boom like they did the last time. The Europeans have made laws to allow cultural heritage institutions and research organizations to let the robots read so that they can help discern new answers to big problems like climate change and health and things like that, that are really great uses of these technologies, as well as in Japan, they're letting the robots read. In this country, we're just having lawsuits after lawsuit after lawsuit, which generally ends up with just a few big players being able to fight those battles and a few big publishers at the end of the day. So we'll end up with basically monopolies or oligarchies in the United States, but we might see something different like innovation and job growth and job creation in Europe and especially, say, Japan and Singapore that are taking a more, I don't know, innovation-friendly approach to this new AI technology. But we'll see how this all turns out.
What should be the role here in the U.S.? What should be the role of government? What would you like to see in terms of regulation or changes in regulation to make this all more accessible?
Well, if you take 100 years ago in the United States, we led in libraries. The Carnegie libraries went forward and flourished, and they were supported by legislatures and they were supported by the judiciary. They were supported financially, locally. They had reinforcement against the forces that wanted to shut down library lending 100 years ago. So they flourished. There's basically a library in every town and city in the United States. That it really helped educate people through the 20th century, so that when the United States came out on top after World War II, they had an educated populace based on libraries, public schools, public universities. It was a mechanism of trying to invest in our citizens. So that was fantastic. What I would like to see is that happen still in the United States. But what we're seeing now is politicians going and grandstanding for book bannings in the United States in a widespread way. Defundings are going on of libraries, public schools, and public universities, but the libraries are particularly under attack. We have these publishers going and saying that libraries cannot buy anything, and they're raising the rates at a very rapid rate, basically crushing the libraries almost out of existence, except the point that they are basically customer service departments for database products from these publishers. And the judiciary now in the United States is regularly siding with the big publishers against the libraries over and over again. And it's not just the Internet Archive. So in the United States, where we had something very different in 100 years ago, which was let's go and create an educated populace that knows how to participate in a democracy, to something that's going on now that may not have been the goal of everybody to go and say, let's go against all of the things that built up the United States 100 years ago, but that's what's going on.
To the extent that there seems to be a battle now between search engines, Google in particular, and the AI companies, to what degree do you think that battle actually may loosen things up in terms of some of these things you're talking about?
I mean, when I use Google and I can now ask, fully formed questions, and it's got this little AI response at the top.
Right.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so
Right.
good. Uh, but they're trying. They're trying to actually go and make it. And then there's these little links that get you back to where the information came from, footnotes, references. So it's sort of a little, tiny little essay about my question. That's pretty cool. And that's all sort of this technology that we knew was coming decades ago, that you basically have this information, you have then you have the computers and you have people that are going and interacting with it. The question is how's the balance made? How is it made such that you have a game with many winners, not just a few? You don't want just a few gigantic either tech companies or just a few big publishers or a few big banks, or you want lots and lots and lots of winners that are innovating all the time to go and make that format that makes, I don't know, well, capitalism and democracies work. What we've ended up with is a relaxation of the antitrust laws starting in the 1980s that have allowed these organizations to become incredibly large. Where back on the East Coast, the A&P grocery chain had antitrust problems because they were putting under one roof a butcher and a baker. And can you imagine that now in the era of Amazon or Walmart or Penguin Random House that just buys up everything? Or you take the big music publishers, there are only a few of them, and they control everything. They control all the music you hear.
Part of the battle now, though, particularly in terms of digitizing all of this, is the barriers to entry seem to be so expensive. For most companies, there's only so many H100 GPUs they can buy.
Oh, that'll be fixed. I mean, the idea of these vector processing units, which is called GPUs, that's actually the same kind of technology that we made the thinking machine supercomputer, the connection machine in the mid 1980s. Now those cost $1 million, and now that they're on sort of on your phone, is just sort of the evolution of technology. But we now have a new way of computing, which is very interesting. It used to be that we had to go and program things procedurally. So you'd say one thing after another, and you always knew the computer was going to do just what it is you asked it to. You may have asked it the wrong thing, but it was just sort of step through and do these things. But now we have a way of programming where we can do machine learning. So you can go and take a set of images and go and say, that is an A, and that is a B, and this is a C. Now, if you see this new image, can you recognize, is that an A, B, or C? And it's good at it. And it's these fuzzy algorithms of machine learning, which is what became some of this AI technology, that is really extending the value of these machines to do things that aren't just procedurally step by step, but going and adapting to images or sounds and the like. That is why we're just so astounded by having our cars work so well. These AI technologies that abound, or we can have optical character recognition of the PDF we just downloaded to our machine, and we're just assuming that it's going to be readable and cut and pastable. So these technologies are all just based on some of these new vector-based things that NVIDIA has really got a jump on because of its GPU research and development, but now we have all the computer chip manufacturers building these architectures.
And how can this all be a positive for what you're trying to do with the Internet Archives?
Oh, what we want is a game with many winners. We want to go and make everyone a publisher and be able to find their own audience. And if they can make money on it, great. We want to make it so that there's long-term preservation of these materials. We want people to learn from people no matter if they're right next to them or a different race, different country, different economic class, different era. We want to basically make it so that people learn and become more creative, interesting, effective people. That is what libraries are for. And so the Internet Archive is part of that education system. And is it happening? I'd say yes and no. We do have much more access to information than we used to, but we don't have access to a lot of the information we used to. So things are more and more locked up. So if you want to get at case law and the illegal issues, you have to go through only one or two large companies and pay so much money that actually you probably aren't going to do it. So where you could go into a library when we were growing up and be able to get access to these, there were 9 different GovDocs, government documents, librarians at the Boston Public Library just 20 years ago, but now there's less than one. And it's so that as this digital transformation has gone on, that we've basically stripped and de-emphasized the libraries, going and owning and providing access to information, and we're depending more and more on fewer and fewer large-scale singular winners, which are these large-scale publishers. Whether you call them internet companies or the traditional publishers, they're all started becoming one.
You mentioned the Library of Congress before. What is the nexus, or what could be the nexus, between the Library of Congress and what you're doing?
Oh, the Library of Congress is the biggest, deepest, richest library ever built by humans. It is astonishing. It is what you get if you have an empire that has a global mandate, and they've been collecting materials. They have 30 people in Delhi. They have a team in Cairo that are always going and buying and adding things to the Library of Congress. The problem is that it's not very accessible. That the Library of Congress goes and collects these materials, but they haven't really done much in terms of digitizing and making them available, except for the public domain. And they did work on that, and we helped on that. We had scanners in the Library of Congress going and digitizing their public domain, and they didn't put any new restrictions on it, unlike some of the commercial companies that take public domain and then make it not public domain, or at least threaten people for making the information available. So the Library of Congress has been a leader in collecting the physical materials. How they're doing on the digital era, I don't exactly know. I think they could probably do a whole lot more there. But then can they go and make it more available? That would be terrific. But most national libraries are preservation organizations as opposed to access ones.
Talk about that, because I think that it's a distinction, indeed with a difference, that really goes to the heart of how people think about libraries, preservation versus access.
Every librarian has preservation and access in their DNA, in their soul. It is universal access to all knowledge. It's access and preservation. So the motto of the Internet Archive and archive.org, where you can go and get these materials for free. So you can go and search on old websites to be able to find things from 20 now almost 30 years ago, and be able to see those old web pages and old websites. Those were collected at a time that had no access at all, but it was just for preservation. Then we made the Wayback Machine to make it more available, or television, so you can search based on what people said. And none of this is commercially viable. It's not a commercial enterprise in any sense. It's a preservation function, and then you make things as available as you are allowed and freely. So that you can go and help people create new and different works by learning from the past. So every librarian has both of these tendencies in them, and how they trade them off is often somewhat a conflict. But so now we have, as I mentioned, the publishers not even selling things to libraries, so they're not allowed to preserve. They're not allowed to preserve ebooks or digital music files or digital movies. They're specifically not allowed to. If you look at the Netflix terms of service, they forbid archiving. This doesn't make any sense. So we've basically said the libraries shall not pass into the digital era, according to them. And that doesn't make it for a community, a culture that knows how to remember and to think about itself. When I was growing up in high school, the way we were taught to think critically is you needed to be able to quote, compare, and contrast. Remember that? That was sort of the little thing that you had to do for your essay, is quote, compare, and contrast. If you can't quote what was said, if it's been disappeared on you, if it's made to make go away, then we have a serious problem.
Is there a technological fix down the road to this problem, a way in which things can be digitized, things can be accessed, but it won't stand in the way of these companies also being able to monetize them, a way that the access can be basically limited in some way.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So there is these companies are doing better and better and better. That's why they can go and get exponentially larger. That's why they're now being bought by private equity companies and leverage buyout companies like Simon and Schuster. They're doing fantastically well. So don't cry for the big publishers. Yeah, I haven't seen any poor ragged publishers where artists and writers, now there's some problems, and that's a money distribution system from that we're not seeing trickle down from these large scale corporations, these large behemoths. But there are mechanisms and to go and digitize materials and make them available to one reader at a time. It's what the publishers do for their in-print works, their Harry Potters and the like. They'll lend things one reader at a time. You'll see that if you go onto your public library with an app, you can have it for 2 weeks and then it will disappear. So libraries do use those same exact technologies to go and limit the use of their digitized materials. But unfortunately, the publishers in the United States have said that that's illegal and sued libraries for doing this by the hundreds, by picking off the Internet Archive in this. In the Netherlands, the Justice Department went the other way. So when the public library said we want to basically lend our ebooks one person at a time, then the justice system in the Netherlands said yes, and then the publishers appealed to Luxembourg, and in Luxembourg across all of Europe, it is legal to go and have libraries own and control and lend digitized materials. That's great. China has long since done this. India has also real interest in trying to educate their people, and so they have broad educational exemptions. It's the United States that's really standing out and swinging from being a Carnegie country to being more of a Library of Alexandria and burning country.
Talk a little bit about your initial vision. Come back to that, the Library of Alexandria, and how that really has been an inspiration to you.
The Library of Alexandria, as Jim Billington, when he was the Librarian of Congress, he said all libraries live in the shadow of the Great Library. The Great Library referring to the Library of Alexandria, that tried to collect all the works of all the peoples of the world and make them accessible to the constraint that they could, which was locally, by translating them, making them part of their university system. And that is an inspiring vision. And every time a new technology comes around, whether it's printing or some of the mass distribution that happened through Europe and now in the digital era, people go back to that dream of being able to learn from everyone that has come before. That was the dream of the internet. And that was the dream of the internet that I signed on to try to make happen. And the Internet Archive is just a piece of that to try to fill in the pieces that aren't being done by others. We already have people sharing widely. It's amazing how much people want other people to know and learn from what they know. It's fantastic. Let's have a library system reinforce this. And let's go and make it so people actually get paid for what it is they produce. Let's get authors, musicians really paid. And we have some impediments to that. But I think we can work it through, but it'll take a decentralization, a routing around, a legislature, a judiciary that wants to side with many winners as opposed to just a few.
How realistic do you think that is?
In this country, I think we're going to go through a dark time. And other countries, I think, are really oriented towards having their people become educated quickly, whether that's in Asia or in Africa. And the only way you can educate your people quickly is by having access to information and having a healthy ecosystem of authors getting paid, of lots of small scale publishers, of libraries, bookstores, access to musicians and videos and documentaries, that if other places are really interested in trying to keep their monopolies under control, I think they will show a much better chance. And those are the places that are on ascendancy. Often libraries get burned during descents. And I think we have opportunity worldwide to bring the next billions of people into the modern world by learning from everything that has come before. And I think their legislatures and their judiciary are going to basically side with libraries.
And finally, Brewster, is there any other organization anywhere in the world trying to do what you're doing with the Internet Archives here in San Francisco?
Oh, there's lots and lots. There are so many, but usually there's specialized libraries. But there's all sorts of quirky, interesting libraries that are still around, but they're usually constrained to just having physical materials. The digital libraries are also flowering all over the world, but they're often specialized. You think of these websites that have, 1,000 works, 10,000 works, sometimes 100,000 that they've either digitized or they collected and organized and preserved. These are the next generators of the libraries of the future. It's what we're depending on. When we search these search engines, and we now more and more search these AIs, is to find information from those collections and go back to those. And we have to make sure we support them. As Timothy Snyder says in his books, we have to support the institutions we really believe in, whether they're journalists or podcasters or librarians or whatever it is that postal systems that we really want to make sure make it into the next generation. We have to stand by them, stand with them, donate, participate, contribute to them.
Brewster Kahle, I thank you so very much for spending time with us.
Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for listening and joining us here on the California Sun Podcast. I hope you'll join us next week. I'm Jeff Sheckman. If you like this podcast, please feel free to share and help others find it by rating and reviewing it on iTunes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.